The moment that changed Ethan Walker's life lasted less than 3 seconds, but the shame stayed with him for years. The scream came from somewhere beyond the crowd. Sharp, sudden, the kind of sound that made conversations stop in mid-sentence. A few pigeons burst into the air above the park fountain. People turned, heads lifted, coffee cups paused halfway to waiting lips. And for one strange second, the entire afternoon seemed to hold its breath. Claire Bennett heard it too. She was standing near the corner of Maple Street and Jefferson Avenue, carrying a paper bag filled with groceries she had picked up after her shift. The late spring sun hung low over the city skyline, painting the glass buildings gold. Children laughed near the playground. A street musician played soft jazz beneath a row of flowering trees. It was supposed to be an ordinary Saturday, the kind people forgot by Monday morning. But ordinary days had a habit of becoming unforgettable without warning. Claire stopped walking. Something felt wrong. She couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the sudden tension in the air. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe it was the quiet skill she had developed after years of paying attention when everyone else looked away. Across the street, hundreds of feet from where she stood, a black luxury SUV was parked beside the curb. A man stepped out while speaking into his phone. Expensive suit, polished shoes, confident posture. The kind of person who looked like he belonged on magazine covers rather than city sidewalks. Ethan Walker. Most people recognized him instantly. The billionaire entrepreneur had built one of the fastest-growing technology companies in America. His face appeared on business channels almost weekly. Interviews, awards, headlines. Success followed him everywhere. But at that moment, Ethan wasn't paying attention to the world around him. His focus was locked on the call in his ear. Numbers, contracts, investors, the endless language of business. Nearby, a young boy wandered a few steps ahead of him. Mason Walker, 8 years old, blonde hair, bright eyes, endless curiosity. He moved through life with the fearless confidence only children seem to possess. Ethan glanced toward him once before returning to his conversation. Just one quick look, just enough to reassure himself everything was fine. Because parents often believe danger announces itself. They imagine warning signs, loud alarms, obvious signals. Life rarely works that way. Claire adjusted her grip on the grocery bag. Her eyes drifted toward the boy, then toward the busy intersection beyond him, then back again. Something about the scene made her slow down. Not fear. Not yet. Just a feeling she couldn't shake. The traffic light changed. Engines hummed. Tires rolled forward. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed between tall buildings. Mason laughed as something caught his attention near the edge of the sidewalk. Ethan continued speaking into his phone. The crowd continued moving. Nobody noticed the tiny chain of events beginning to form. Nobody except Claire. And as the warm afternoon breeze stirred the leaves above her, she felt her heartbeat quicken for reasons she did not yet understand. Claire had learned long ago that the smallest details often mattered most. While other people noticed headlines, she noticed expressions. While others listened to words, she listened to pauses. It was a habit she had carried since childhood, one that had quietly followed her into adulthood like a shadow. Most customers at Harbor Bean Cafe never realized it. To them, she was simply the friendly waitress who remembered their coffee orders and always smiled when they walked through the door. Few people ever wondered who she was beyond the apron. Claire preferred it that way. Her apartment sat 3 miles from the cafe in a modest brick building overlooking a narrow park. It was not large. It was not impressive, but it was hers. Every month, she paid the rent on time. Every morning, she woke before sunrise. Every evening, she returned home tired but grateful. There was dignity in that routine. At 27, she had discovered that peace was often worth more than ambition. Earlier that same morning, before the city had fully awakened, Claire had arrived at work carrying a travel mug filled with black coffee. The streets had still been damp from overnight rain. The scent of fresh bread drifted from a nearby bakery. Inside the cafe, she had greeted her coworkers, tied her apron, and begun another shift serving commuters, students, and office workers. Nothing unusual, nothing remarkable. Yet beneath her calm smile lived memories she rarely shared. Some experiences changed a person forever. Some lessons never stopped echoing. Even now, years later, certain sounds could still pull her backward through time. The distant screech of tires, a sudden shout, a frightened voice. She had learned to hide those reactions well. Most people never noticed. As Claire stood near the intersection, her eyes remained fixed on Mason. The boy reminded her of someone she once knew. Not because they looked alike, not because they sounded alike, but because they carried the same fearless energy, the same curiosity, the same tendency to chase the world without stopping to consider danger. Mason pointed excitedly toward something across the street. A bright red ball rolled along the sidewalk before bouncing toward the curb. The boy smiled and took a few quick steps after it. Nearby, Ethan continued his conversation. His voice remained calm and controlled, discussing projections, quarterly targets, and upcoming negotiations. People often described Ethan Walker as brilliant. They called him disciplined, visionary, unstoppable. They rarely called him present. Success had demanded pieces of his attention for so many years that he no longer noticed when it disappeared. The crowd moved around him like water around stone. Business first. Everything else later. Claire shifted slightly. Her grocery bag rustled in her hand. A cool breeze brushed against her face. Something deep inside her tightened. Not panic. Not yet. Just certainty. The kind that arrives without explanation. Across the intersection, the traffic signal changed once more. Cars began moving through the avenue. Mason watched his red ball bounce farther ahead. One more step. Then another. Claire's heartbeat quickened. The afternoon sound seemed to fade. The music, the conversations, the laughter, everything softened into the background. Her attention narrowed to a single point. The boy, the street, the seconds unfolding between them. And for the first time that day, Claire began to move. Mason laughed as the red ball bounced off the edge of the sidewalk and rolled toward the corner of the intersection. To him, it was a game. A simple chase on a beautiful afternoon. Children often measured the world differently than adults. Distances felt shorter. Risks felt smaller. Every new moment felt like an adventure waiting to happen. Claire quickened her pace. Not running. Not yet. But faster than before. Her groceries shifted inside the paper bag as she crossed a few yards of pavement. Around her, people remained absorbed in their own lives. A young couple studied a map near the fountain. An older man sat on a bench feeding birds. Office workers carried iced coffees back toward nearby buildings. Nobody seemed concerned. Nobody appeared to notice the tiny gap growing between Mason and his father. Ethan remained focused on the voice coming through his wireless earpiece. A major acquisition was entering its final stage. Months of negotiations rested on details that could change with a single sentence. He listened carefully, responding with the confidence that had helped him build a fortune. To everyone watching, he looked completely in control. Yet control is often an illusion, especially when life decides to test what matters most. Mason reached the curb. The ball rolled another few feet. He smiled and stepped forward. Claire stopped walking entirely. Her pulse thudded against her ribs. She had seen this pattern before. Different faces, different places. The same dangerous combination of distraction and timing. The memory arrived without invitation. A summer afternoon many years ago. Bright sunshine. A younger version of herself standing helplessly as events moved too quickly to stop. Claire pushed the memory away. This was not then. This was now. And now required action. The breeze lifted strands of her light brown hair. She set the grocery bag down beside a newspaper box without taking her eyes off Mason. The sounds of the city returned all at once. Engines, footsteps, music, voices. Everything seemed louder. Closer. Faster. Mason glanced back briefly toward his father. Ethan was still speaking into the call. Still unaware. The boy turned forward again. The ball continued rolling. Claire took another step. Then another. Across the avenue, sunlight flashed against the windshield of an approaching delivery truck moving steadily through the intersection. Nothing unusual. Nothing reckless. Just another vehicle following its route through the city. Yet Claire instantly understood what others had not. Two paths were converging. Two timelines were about to meet. She opened her mouth to call out. The words caught in her throat for a fraction of a second. Mason moved again. One more small step. Claire's heartbeat accelerated. Her instincts were no longer whispering. They were shouting. The comfortable rhythm of the afternoon had disappeared completely. Every second suddenly felt important. Every movement carried weight. Ethan finally lifted his eyes from the pavement ahead. His conversation paused for the briefest moment. Something in the scene had changed. Something he could not yet identify. Claire did not wait to analyze it. She did not wait for certainty. She did not wait for permission. She moved forward with purpose, her eyes locked on the little boy near the curb, knowing that within the next few seconds, everything was about to change. Claire broke into a run. The distance between her and Mason could not have been more than 30 feet, but it felt much farther. Time seemed to stretch. The city around her blurred into colors and motion. All that remained clear was the little boy standing near the edge of the curb. Mason finally reached his ball. He bent slightly, smiling as his fingers closed around the bright red rubber surface. For a brief moment, he looked proud of himself, like a child who had completed an important mission. Then he heard someone calling his name. He turned. Confusion crossed his face. Claire saw it immediately. Children often paused when adults shouted instructions. They stopped to understand. They stopped to process. And sometimes those few seconds mattered more than anyone realized. Mason. The voice came from Ethan. His business call had ended abruptly. The phone was no longer pressed against his ear. For the first time that afternoon, his full attention landed on his son. A cold sensation settled in his chest. Not because he understood exactly what was happening, because suddenly he understood that he had not been paying attention. The realization hit harder than any financial loss he had ever experienced. Around them, a few pedestrians also began to notice. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. The approaching delivery truck continued through the intersection at a normal speed, following a green light. The driver had no reason to expect anything unusual, no reason to anticipate a child lingering near the edge of a busy crossing. Claire moved faster. Her sneakers struck the pavement. Her breathing sharpened. She could hear her own heartbeat now. Loud, steady, determined. Years ago, she had frozen when life demanded action. Years ago, fear had stolen precious seconds she could never get back. She had promised herself that if another moment ever arrived, she would not hesitate again. Mason looked from the ball in his hands to his father across the street. He seemed uncertain, unsure whether to move forward or backward, unsure why everyone suddenly looked worried. Claire reached him first. Her hand gently found his shoulder. "Come with me," she said, her voice calm despite the storm of emotion rushing through her chest. The boy obeyed instantly. Something about her tone carried certainty. She guided him several steps away from the curb and toward the safety of the sidewalk. Only then did the tension break. The truck continued through the intersection. Traffic flowed normally. Life resumed its rhythm almost immediately. Yet nothing felt normal anymore. Ethan hurried toward them, his face pale. The confidence that usually surrounded him had vanished. He dropped to one knee beside Mason and wrapped both hands around his son's shoulders. Mason blinked in surprise. "Dad?" he asked softly. Ethan could not answer right away. Relief flooded through him so quickly it left him speechless. His eyes lifted toward Claire. She stood a few feet away, catching her breath. The afternoon sunlight illuminated the strands of hair that had escaped her ponytail. She looked ordinary. A waitress carrying no title, no influence, no fortune. Yet at that moment, Ethan knew one uncomfortable truth. When it mattered most, the bravest person on that street had not been him. For several seconds, nobody moved. The city continued around them, yet the small space surrounding Claire, Ethan, and Mason felt strangely separate from everything else. A quiet island in the middle of a crowded afternoon. Mason still held the red ball against his chest. His young face showed more curiosity than fear. Children recovered quickly from moments adults carried for years. Ethan rose slowly to his feet. His expensive suit suddenly felt unimportant. His schedule felt unimportant. The meeting he had been discussing only moments earlier felt completely irrelevant. He looked at Claire again. Really looked at her this time. Not as a stranger passing through the city. Not as another face in a crowd. As a person. "Thank you," he said. The words came out softer than he expected. Claire offered a small nod. "He is okay. That is what matters." Ethan glanced toward Mason before returning his attention to her. Most people would have accepted the praise. Some would have exaggerated what happened. Others might have expected recognition. Claire seemed uncomfortable with all of it, as though she wanted nothing more than to collect her groceries and continue her day. "I was not paying attention," Ethan admitted quietly. The confession surprised even him. Successful people rarely admitted mistakes. Billionaires almost never did. Yet standing there, he could not deny the truth. Claire studied him for a moment. There was no judgment in her expression, no criticism, only understanding. Somehow that made the admission feel even heavier. Parents are human, she said. Sometimes life gets loud. Ethan almost laughed. Life gets loud. It was such a simple sentence. Yet it described his existence perfectly. For years he had filled every hour with meetings, flights, negotiations, presentations, interviews, and endless goals. Every achievement created another target. Every success demanded another sacrifice. Somewhere along the way, the noise had become normal. Mason tugged on his father's sleeve. Dad, she saved my ball too. The boy smiled proudly. Ethan blinked. Then a reluctant smile appeared for the first time that afternoon. I guess she did. Mason walked over to Claire. Thank you, Mississippi. Claire, she replied. Thank you, Claire. His sincerity made her smile. Children had a way of expressing gratitude without complication. No hidden motives. No expectations. Just honesty. Nearby, a few people who had witnessed the moment began drifting away. Conversations resumed. The park returned to life. The unusual moment was already becoming a memory for everyone except the three people standing at its center. Ethan reached into his pocket and removed a business card. The thick white card carried his name, title, and direct contact information. He held it toward Claire. If there is ever anything I can do for you, please call me. Claire looked at the card but did not immediately take it. Ethan noticed the hesitation. Most people accepted his card as though it were a winning lottery ticket. Claire simply considered it. Finally, she accepted it with a polite smile. Thank you. Nothing more. No excitement. No sudden change in attitude. Just gratitude. Ethan found himself strangely impressed by that. As the afternoon sun drifted lower across the skyline, he realized something uncomfortable. The woman standing in front of him seemed far more grounded than many executives he met in boardrooms worth billions of dollars. And for the first time in years, Ethan Walker began wondering whether success and wisdom were actually the same thing. Claire picked up her grocery bag and prepared to leave. For her, the moment was over. The boy was safe. The afternoon could continue. That was enough. Yet as she turned toward the sidewalk, she could feel Ethan watching her. Not in the way strangers usually looked at one another. There was curiosity now. Questions. The kind that lingered long after an event ended. Claire, Ethan called. She paused. Yes. Which cafe do you work at? The question surprised her. Harbor Bean Cafe. A few blocks from here. Ethan nodded slowly as though committing the information to memory. Do you like it there? Claire smiled faintly. I do. It was such a simple answer that Ethan almost laughed. Most people he met spoke endlessly about future plans, promotions, investments, and ambitions. Claire answered with 4 words. I do. The simplicity felt refreshing. Mason stepped beside her. Do you make hot chocolate? Claire smiled. The best hot chocolate in Boston. Mason's eyes widened. Better than my dad's chef? Ethan raised an eyebrow. That is a bold claim. You would have to come find out, Claire replied. For the first time, Ethan noticed something unusual. She was not intimidated by him. She was polite, respectful, but completely unimpressed by his status. It was a rare experience. Most conversations changed the moment people recognized his name. Their tone shifted. Their posture changed. Sometimes their expectations appeared instantly. Claire remained exactly the same. The realization stayed with him long after she walked away. He watched her disappear into the flow of pedestrians until she became just another face among hundreds. Yet somehow she seemed more memorable than executives he had known for years. Dad, Mason said. Ethan looked down. Yes. She is nice. Ethan followed his son's gaze toward the distant sidewalk. She is. They began walking toward the SUV. This time Ethan kept his phone in his pocket. The missed calls could wait. The unread messages could wait. For once, the world would continue spinning without his immediate involvement. As they reached the vehicle, Mason climbed into the back seat. Ethan remained outside for a moment, staring across the avenue. A breeze drifted through the city. Traffic lights changed. The afternoon moved forward. Yet something inside him felt different. Not transformed. Not yet. But unsettled. As though a crack had appeared in a version of himself he had accepted for too long. During the drive home, he found his thoughts returning to Claire again and again. Her calm voice. Her steady eyes. Her refusal to make the moment about herself. Most people chased recognition. She seemed to avoid it. Most people wanted something. She had wanted nothing. By the time the Manhattan skyline appeared beyond the windshield, Ethan realized he had spent nearly 20 minutes thinking about a waitress he had known for less than 5 minutes. And somewhere deep inside, a question continued repeating itself. If a woman working at a neighborhood cafe could possess that much courage, that much clarity, and that much quiet strength, how many other extraordinary people had he spent years overlooking simply because he never stopped long enough to see them? Monday arrived with gray clouds hanging over Boston Harbor and a light rain tapping against cafe windows. Harbor Bean Cafe filled quickly with its usual morning crowd. Nurses grabbing coffee before long shifts. College students carrying backpacks. Office workers checking emails before the workday began. Claire moved through the room with practiced ease. She remembered names, preferred drinks, small details that made people feel seen. To most customers, she appeared exactly the same as always. Calm, professional, ordinary. Yet every so often, her thoughts drifted back to the boy with the red ball. She hoped he was doing well. Nothing more. Meanwhile, 20 stories above downtown Manhattan, Ethan Walker sat at the head of a conference table surrounded by executives. Large screens displayed charts, forecasts, and quarterly projections. The room buzzed with discussion. Numbers climbed. Opportunities expanded. Profits increased. Everything looked successful. Yet Ethan found himself distracted. "What do you think, Ethan?" asked his chief financial officer. The room fell silent. Normally, Ethan responded immediately. Today he blinked. "Sorry. Repeat that." Several executives exchanged surprised glances. Ethan Walker never lost focus. The meeting continued, but his attention kept drifting elsewhere. He remembered Claire setting down her groceries without hesitation. He remembered her steady voice. He remembered the uncomfortable realization that while she had acted, he had frozen. By lunchtime, he closed his laptop and stared out at the skyline. Thousands of people moved through the city below, each carrying a story, each carrying struggles invisible to everyone else. For years, he had judged success through achievements and wealth. Now he wondered what other measurements mattered. That afternoon, Mason walked into Ethan's office carrying a notebook. "Dad." Ethan looked up. "What is it, buddy?" Mason climbed into a chair. "Can we visit the hot chocolate lady?" Ethan smiled despite himself. "The hot chocolate lady?" "Claire." Mason opened the notebook and revealed a drawing. Colored pencils filled the page. There was a small cafe, a red ball, a smiling waitress. Ethan studied the picture. Children often understood things adults complicated. To Mason, Claire was not a waitress, not a stranger, not a social class. She was simply the person who helped when help was needed. "Maybe we can," Ethan said. Mason grinned. "Today?" Ethan laughed softly. "Maybe not today." But after Mason left the office, Ethan continued looking at the drawing. Something about it stayed with him. Late that evening, as rain streaked across his office windows, he opened his desk drawer. Claire's brief acceptance of his business card replayed in his memory. No excitement, no ambition, no attempt to impress him, just simple gratitude. The more he thought about it, the stranger it felt. He had spent years surrounded by people who wanted access to his world. Claire seemed perfectly content living in her own. Ethan leaned back in his chair and glanced toward the dark city beyond the glass. Somewhere out there, a waitress was probably ending another shift, serving coffee, cleaning tables, living a life completely separate from his. Yet he had a feeling their paths were not finished crossing. And for reasons he could not fully explain, that possibility felt more important than any business deal waiting on his desk. 3 days later, a cold wind swept through the streets of Boston as Claire wiped down the last table near the front window of Harbor Bean Cafe. The lunch rush had finally slowed. Coffee machines hissed softly in the background. Dishes clinked in the kitchen. Outside, pedestrians hurried past beneath dark clouds, threatening another evening rainstorm. It felt like every other weekday. Familiar, predictable, safe. Claire preferred days like that. The manager called from behind the counter. "Claire, can you bring this order to table 7? She glanced toward the corner booth. A father and son had just entered. The boy looked excited about something. The father appeared distracted. The sight made her smile slightly. Some things never changed. Carrying 2 mugs and a plate of pastries, she crossed the cafe floor. Then she froze. Sitting at table 7 were Ethan Walker and Mason. The boy's face lit up immediately. "Dad, I told you it was her." Claire laughed softly. "You found the place." Mason grinned. "I said the hot chocolate was real." Ethan stood politely. Gone was the hurried businessman from the intersection. Today he looked different. More relaxed. More present. "I hope you do not mind the surprise," he said. "Mason has been asking to come here all week." Claire set the drinks down. "Then I guess I should not disappoint him." Mason pointed toward the menu. "The best hot chocolate in Boston. That is what you promised." "And I stand by that statement," Claire replied. For the next few minutes, she moved between customers while occasionally checking on their table. Every time she passed by, Mason had another question. How long had she worked there? What was her favorite dessert? Did she really know everyone's coffee order? Claire answered patiently. Ethan mostly listened, watching, observing, the same way she had observed people for years. Eventually, the cafe grew quieter. The afternoon crowd thinned. Rain began tapping softly against the windows. Ethan stirred his coffee and looked around the room. No luxury decor, no expensive artwork, no executives discussing mergers. Yet there was warmth here, genuine warmth. Customers greeted employees by name. Strangers held doors open for one another. A college student helped an elderly woman carry her tray without being asked. Small acts, ordinary acts, yet somehow they felt important. "You know," Ethan said quietly, "I spend most days in rooms full of powerful people. But this place feels more human than any boardroom I have ever entered." Claire smiled. "That is because nobody comes here to impress anyone." Ethan looked down at his cup. Her words lingered. Simple, honest, uncomfortable in their accuracy. Mason suddenly pulled a folded piece of paper from his backpack. "I made something." He handed it to Claire. She unfolded it carefully. It was another drawing. This time the picture showed the cafe. Mason sat at a table drinking hot chocolate. Ethan sat beside him. Claire stood nearby smiling. Above them, written in large, uneven letters, were 4 words. "Thank you for helping me." Claire felt her throat tighten slightly. Not from sadness, from sincerity. Children had a way of expressing truths adults often complicated. She looked at Mason, then at Ethan. Neither of them knew it yet, but this simple visit was about to uncover a chapter of her life she had spent years trying to leave behind. Claire carefully folded the drawing and handed it back to Mason, but the warmth in her smile lingered. The boy beamed as though he had just presented a masterpiece to a museum curator. In his mind, he probably had. Ethan watched the exchange quietly. There was something about the way Claire interacted with Mason that felt effortless. She never spoke down to him, never treated him like an interruption. She listened, truly listened. It was a skill Ethan suddenly realized was becoming rare. The rain outside intensified, streaking the cafe windows with silver lines. Customers settled deeper into conversations. The room filled with the comforting aroma of coffee and cinnamon pastries. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. Then a voice called from behind the counter. "Claire, your package arrived." Claire froze, only for a second, yet Ethan noticed. Her smile faded slightly before returning. She walked to the register and accepted a small cardboard envelope from a delivery driver. Nothing unusual about the package itself. What caught Ethan's attention was the change in her expression. The calm confidence he had come to associate with her suddenly seemed fragile. Claire thanked the driver and slipped the envelope into her apron pocket without opening it. She returned to work immediately, but something had shifted. Even Mason noticed. "Is she okay?" he whispered. Ethan followed Claire with his eyes. "I do not know." Across the room, Claire continued serving customers, but her thoughts had drifted elsewhere. The package felt heavier than it should have. She already knew what was inside. Another letter. Another reminder. Another attempt to reopen a chapter she had spent years trying to close. Some wounds healed. Others simply learned how to stay quiet. During a lull in the afternoon rush, Claire stepped into the employee hallway behind the kitchen. The noise of the cafe faded behind the swinging door. For several seconds, she simply stood there staring at the envelope. Her fingers tightened around it. Finally, she opened it. Inside was a single folded document and a handwritten note. Claire read the first few lines. Her shoulders stiffened. The familiar ache returned immediately. Not anger. Not fear. Something more complicated. Regret mixed with memory. She closed her eyes. 5 years had passed. 5 years since one terrible afternoon had changed the direction of her life. 5 years since she had stopped believing that some things could ever be fixed. Back in the cafe, Ethan found himself watching the hallway door. He could not explain why. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps concern. Or perhaps he recognized something in Claire's expression because he had seen it in his own reflection before. The look of someone carrying a burden nobody else could see. When Claire finally returned, she smiled again. professional, composed. Yet Ethan could tell the smile required effort now. The difference was subtle. Most people would never notice. But once you see real strength in someone, you begin noticing the moments when they are forced to carry it. Mason waved her over. Claire, do you want to see my science project next time? She laughed softly. Of course I do. Her voice sounded steady. Yet as she glanced toward the rain-covered window, a distant sadness briefly crossed her eyes. And for the first time, Ethan realized the woman who had changed his life in a matter of seconds might be fighting battles of her own that nobody around her knew existed. That evening, long after the last customer had left, Claire sat alone in her apartment with the letter resting on her kitchen table. Rain tapped softly against the window beside her. The small lamp above the sink cast a warm circle of light across the room. Everything looked peaceful, yet her thoughts were miles away. She unfolded the document once more. The words had not changed. The offer remained the same. A legal settlement, a formal apology, an invitation to finally revisit what happened 5 years earlier. Claire stared at the page before setting it down again. Some people imagined closure arrived with a single conversation. Others believed time healed everything. Claire knew neither was always true. Certain moments stayed with you. They simply learned how to become quieter. Across the city, Ethan sat in his penthouse office reviewing reports he could barely focus on. The image of Claire standing in the cafe hallway continued returning to him. Something about her expression had unsettled him. He had spent years reading people. Investors, competitors, partners. He recognized confidence, ambition, fear. But what he saw in Claire had been different. It looked like grief carried with dignity. Finally, he opened his laptop and searched for Harbor Bean Cafe. A few customer reviews appeared. Pictures of pastries, photos of smiling employees. Then he found an article published several years earlier in a local newspaper. His eyes narrowed. The headline mentioned a community scholarship recipient named Claire Bennett. Curious, he opened the article. The story described a young woman who had planned to attend graduate school. A woman praised for her academic achievements and volunteer work. Ethan continued reading. Then he stopped. One sentence caught his attention. Following a tragic family accident, Bennett postponed her education indefinitely. Ethan leaned back in his chair. The article offered no details, no explanation. Yet suddenly pieces began fitting together. The hesitation, the sadness, the way Claire reacted near the intersection, the certainty with which she moved when everyone else froze. Meanwhile, several miles away, Claire opened a small wooden box stored on the top shelf of her closet. Inside were photographs, ticket stubs, handwritten notes, and memories she rarely allowed herself to revisit. She lifted one photograph carefully. A smiling teenage boy stood beside her beneath bright summer sunshine. Her younger brother, Ryan. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same eyes, the same easy smile. Claire traced the edge of the photograph with her thumb. 5 years had passed, yet some days the loss still felt recent. Some days she could almost hear his laughter. A tear formed but never fell. She smiled instead, quietly, tenderly, the way people smile when remembering someone they never stopped loving. Outside, the rain continued falling over Boston. Inside her apartment, Claire returned the photograph to the box and closed the lid. What she did not know was that the past she had worked so hard to leave behind was slowly moving toward her once again. And this time, she would not have to face it alone. The next morning arrived bright and clear, as if the storm had never existed. Sunlight poured across the city, reflecting from office towers and apartment windows alike. Claire walked to work carrying her usual travel mug, determined to focus on the present instead of the letter waiting on her kitchen table. For years she had survived by moving forward one day at a time. Today would be no different. Yet life rarely asked permission before changing direction. Shortly after noon, a black SUV stopped outside Harbor Bean Cafe. Claire noticed it through the window while refilling a customer's coffee. She thought little of it at first. Expensive vehicles occasionally appeared in the neighborhood. But when Ethan Walker stepped out carrying a folder beneath his arm, her expression shifted. He entered the cafe alone. No assistants. No security detail. No business partners. Just Ethan. The lunch crowd filled most of the tables, yet his eyes immediately found Claire. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. Something in his voice felt different, more serious than before. Claire led him to an empty table near the back of the cafe. Sunlight filtered through the window beside them. For a moment, neither spoke. Ethan placed the folder on the table. I need to apologize, he said quietly. Claire frowned slightly. For what? Ethan looked down. I searched for information about you. The honesty surprised her. Most people would have hidden it. Ethan continued. I found an article from several years ago. About your scholarship. About your brother. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Just heavy. Claire stared out the window for several seconds. The city moved on outside. People hurried past carrying shopping bags and briefcases. Ordinary lives continuing as usual. Finally she nodded. His name was Ryan. Ethan listened. Truly listened. Claire could see it. There were no interruptions. No attempts to fix anything. Only attention. He was 17, she said softly. He could make friends with anyone. He made every room brighter. A faint smile touched her lips. Then faded. After he was gone, everything changed. Ethan remained silent. Some stories deserved room to breathe. Claire folded her hands together. I was supposed to start graduate school that fall. I had plans. Goals. Everything seemed clear. She looked down. Then suddenly it was not. The words were simple, yet Ethan felt their weight. He understood success. He understood ambition. But loss was different. Loss rewrote maps people thought they understood. The letter, Ethan said carefully. Claire looked up. How did you know? Because I saw your face when it arrived. For the first time, Claire laughed softly. You notice more than people think. Ethan smiled. I am trying to. She studied him for a moment. The old version of Ethan Walker might have offered solutions. Lawyers. Money. Connections. The man sitting across from her offered something far rarer. Presence. Understanding. And as sunlight filled the small cafe, Claire realized she had spoken about Ryan more openly in the last 5 minutes than she had in years. Somehow, without intending to, Ethan had given her something she did not know she needed. Someone willing to hear the story without trying to change it. The conversation lingered in Claire's mind long after Ethan left the cafe. That evening, she returned home carrying something unfamiliar. Not answers. Not closure. Hope. Small and fragile, but real. The unopened legal file still sat on her kitchen table. For weeks, she had avoided making a decision. Every time she looked at it, old memories returned. Every time she considered responding, uncertainty followed. Yet now something felt different. She pulled out a chair and sat down across from the envelope. The apartment was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic outside. Claire opened the folder once more and carefully read every page. This time she did not stop halfway through. This time she did not set it aside. At the bottom was a phone number. A direct line to the mediation office handling the case. Claire stared at it for several moments. Then she picked up her phone. Across the city, Ethan was finishing dinner with Mason when his phone buzzed. A message appeared from an unknown number. Thank you for listening today. That is all it said. Yet Ethan smiled immediately because he knew exactly who had sent it. Mason noticed. Is it Claire? Ethan laughed softly. How did you know? Mason shrugged. You smiled differently. Children notice things adults missed. Ethan looked down at the message again. For years, success had been measured through growth charts, market values, and quarterly reports. Lately, the measurements felt different. A conversation. A quiet thank you. An afternoon spent actually paying attention to his son. Somehow those moments carried more weight than numbers ever had. 2 weeks passed. Spring slowly gave way to early summer. Trees brightened. Sidewalk cafes filled with customers. Harbor Bean Cafe remained busy as ever. One Saturday afternoon, Claire stood behind the counter when the front door opened. Mason rushed inside carrying a large poster board nearly as wide as his shoulders. Ethan followed behind him, trying unsuccessfully to keep up. Claire, Mason announced proudly. Every customer within 20 feet turned to look. Claire laughed. What do you have there? Mason placed the poster board on a nearby table. Photographs covered the surface. Science fair pictures. School projects. Drawings. Awards. At the center was a handwritten note. Thank you for believing in me. Claire felt emotion rise unexpectedly. You won, she asked. Mason nodded enthusiastically. First place. Ethan stood quietly beside him. He wanted you to know. Claire looked at the father and son, then at the smiling boy standing between them. She realized something remarkable had happened. The child she helped that afternoon was thriving. The father who once lived through conference calls was changing. And somehow, without intending to, she had changed too. Not because the past disappeared. Not because old pain vanished. but because she finally understood that moving forward did not mean forgetting. It meant carrying memories without letting them carry you. As sunlight poured through the cafe windows, laughter filled the room. Customers returned to their conversations. Coffee cups clinked softly. Life continued. Ordinary, beautiful, and for the first time in many years, Claire felt completely at peace with where she was standing. Summer arrived fully a few weeks later. The trees surrounding the neighborhood park stood deep green beneath clear blue skies. Children laughed near the playground. Dogs chased tennis balls across open grass. The city seemed lighter somehow, as though everyone had collectively decided to slow down and enjoy the season. On a bright Saturday afternoon, Claire sat on a park bench holding a paper cup of coffee. Not far away, Mason ran across the grass with a group of friends. His laughter carried easily through the warm air. Ethan stood nearby, watching him with a quiet smile. It was a simple scene, ordinary, yet neither of them took it for granted. Some gifts only reveal their value after they nearly slip away. Ethan sat beside Claire. For a few moments, neither spoke. They simply watched Mason play. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. I used to think success meant never missing a meeting. Claire smiled. And now? Ethan looked toward his son. Now I think success means knowing when to stop looking at a screen and start paying attention to the people standing right in front of you. Claire nodded. The answer felt honest. Earned. The kind of wisdom life teaches slowly. A gentle breeze moved through the park. Somewhere nearby, a musician played an acoustic guitar. The notes drifted through the air like memories. Ethan glanced toward Claire. You changed more than one life that day. Claire immediately shook her head. No, people change themselves. Ethan laughed softly. Still humble. Still learning, she replied. They sat quietly again. Across the field, Mason suddenly waved at them. In one hand, he held a bright red ball, the same kind he had chased months earlier. Claire felt a smile spread across her face. This time there was no fear attached to the image, only gratitude. Some memories hurt less when new ones grow around them. The legal matter that had haunted Claire for years was finally resolved. The conversations she once avoided had happened. The burden she carried alone for so long no longer felt quite so heavy. Ryan's memory remained with her, but it no longer lived only in sorrow. It lived in kindness, in courage. In every moment, she chose to show up for others. Ethan had changed too. He worked hard, but he no longer allowed success to steal every hour of his life. He attended school events, weekend games, science fairs. He listened more, rushed less. And Mason noticed. Children always notice. As the afternoon sun began sinking lower across the horizon, Mason ran toward them carrying the red ball under his arm. He stopped in front of Claire and handed her a folded piece of paper. I made one more drawing. Claire opened it carefully. 3 figures stood together beneath a bright summer sky. Herself, Mason, Ethan. Above them were a few simple words written in uneven handwriting. The bravest people are the kindest people. Claire looked at the drawing, then at Mason, then at Ethan. No speeches were necessary. No grand ending. Just a quiet understanding shared between 3 people whose lives had crossed at exactly the right moment. Because sometimes the people who change the world do not stand on stages. They do not appear on magazine covers. They do not ask for recognition. Sometimes they wear an apron. Sometimes they carry groceries home after work. Sometimes they simply notice what everyone else misses. And if this story reminded you of someone whose kindness changed a life, perhaps take a moment to share their memory below. And if stories about courage, dignity, and the quiet strength hidden in ordinary people speak to your heart, we would be honored to have you join us again for the next one. Claire watched Mason run back toward the field, smiling as the golden light settled across the park. For the first time in a very long while, everything felt exactly as it should.